Throughout the history of the Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door any percent speedrun, we've seen countless glitch and trick discoveries that have allowed community members to push the world record for the game far lower than anyone would have imagined in the years prior. The constant evolution of these discoveries has culminated into what we know TTYD as today, an excellent showcase of what happens when glitch hunters work together and completely break a game. The real-time world record has gone from 6 hours long in 2013 to just 2 hours and 19 minutes in 2020. At the forefront of this progression is one of the speedrun's most notable and most important tricks, Teleported Room Early, often abbreviated as TRE. Initially saving around 30 minutes, TRE would go on to be one of the most integral components that contributed to the speedrun becoming more than 2.5 hours lower than it was at the time of TRE's original discovery. Much like the overall speedrun route for TTYD, Teleported Room Early has seen several evolutions over time, each one offering varying degrees of time save. Between its initial discovery on June 3rd, 2015, and its current fastest version discovered on October 17th, 2019, there have been 5 entirely unique methods for performing Teleported Room Early, each that have their own small variations that I'll go into. I feel that it's important to show these different methods and discuss their significance in order to allow you to gain a better understanding of the history of the TTYD any percent speedrun, specifically the progression of the route differences between the Japanese version and the US and PAL versions of the game. Teleported Room Early is absolutely vital in explaining why, after 5 years, US and PAL are now the fastest versions of the game. This is the history of Teleported Room Early. First, I want to discuss why TRE is significant in the first place. In order to normally access the X0 Fortress in Chapter 7, you have to endure the long and dreadful General White Hunt, in which you have to search for General White throughout multiple areas across the game in order to activate the cannon to reach the X0 Fortress on the moon. To negate this time-consuming quest, it was theorized that if we could find a way inside the teleporter room before Chapter 7, then we could skip straight to the fortress without completing the hunt. For the beginning of our story, let's talk about the first ever method of TRE, the Bobbery glitch and Flurry Superslide method. This method was found on June 3rd by Solidified Gaming, T-Will14, and myself. I'll first start by explaining one of the key components of how this method works. The Flurry Superslide is a glitch that allows Mario to move in a different direction while opening a doorway. Specifically, this direction is to the left and right on the US and PAL versions, and down on the Japanese version. If we try facing left on US or PAL, we will always end up being redirected inside the bar, because as the camera rotates, Mario's left direction begins to rotate towards the inside of the bar. Well, then we're left with the Japanese's downward superslide, and it may initially seem that this wouldn't work at all. However, we have a trick up our sleeves. Notice that when we enter the bar here, our camera rotates 90 degrees such that moving down would now result in us moving towards the teleporter room. Now the only question is, how can we perform a Flurry Superslide downwards while the camera's rotated? This is where the second glitch comes into play, the Bobbery glitch. As the name suggests, we can use Bobbery to make this possible. First, we constantly hold down X such that he explodes while we're still holding him. Before and after the explosion, we can simply hold down a direction and hold down the R trigger in order to enter a paper mode state. However, there are some weird traits about this current state. If we continue to hold a direction on the analog stick, you can notice that we're able to move at full speed as opposed to paper mode's normally slower movement speed. More importantly, we can actually enter doors in this state. When doing so, we enter the building with the slower paper mode speed. This results in us failing to enter inside the building, leaving us in the empty void outside. The teleporter room collision still exists in this void, so we can't simply walk towards the teleporter. Instead, we need to combine this glitch with a Flurry Superslide. If we perform Bobbery glitch and get left outside, we can quickly unspin, pause to swap our partner to Flurry, and then perform a Flurry Superslide. This Superslide is done by activating Flurry 3 frames before pressing A to open the door. Then we repeatedly press X to redirect Mario downwards towards the teleporter room. Interestingly, super slides allow you to slide through walls for the duration of the doorway animation. Thus, with the camera rotated 90 degrees, we can slide down into the teleporter room. This method was easily RTA viable, and runners began using it in runs shortly after its discovery to save around 30 minutes. Later the same day, T-Will14 found a way to perform teleporter room early without bobbery by abusing some collision in the southeast edge of the room. Squeezing Mario between the railing and the pillar can cause Mario to enter the glitched paper mode state. From here, we have to navigate to the teleporter room, but jumping and landing on the ground will actually cause us to unspin from paper mode, which means we won't be able to enter the doorway slowly and stay outside. It was found that by using a spin jump before landing, Mario will continue to stay in the glitchy state. From there, we can successfully make it up to the bar door and use a super slide to slide right into the teleporter room. This revised method didn't immediately serve any use as the current route still obtained bobbery. Once Palace Skip was discovered, this method became a necessity since we no longer had bobbery. Because the spin jumps before landing don't require any frame-perfect precision, RTA runners were able to adapt to this version once Palace Skip was discovered. Almost a year later, on April 6, 2016, a further revision to the strategy was found which negated the need for the super boots. Recall how, while in the glitched paper mode state, we begin to unspin from paper mode when landing on the ground. It was actually found that if you hold neutral on the frame before you land, then hold the direction the frame after, you can actually maintain your glitched state. By doing this to get up to the ledge and onto the elevator, you can successfully perform teleporter room early without bobbery nor the super boots. Because this trick requires you to hold neutral and then hold the direction on a specific frame, this trick wasn't immediately used in RTA, as skipping the super boots only saved a few minutes. It was first used in a new world record on November 5th, 2017 by Soric, with a time of 2 hours, 48 minutes, and 38 seconds. It's important to reiterate that, up to this point, all the aforementioned methods are only possible on the Japanese version of the game, due to the fact that Flurry Super Slides only send Mario downwards on this version exclusively. Though the only teleporter room early method at the time resulted in the Japanese speedrun picking up quite a huge lead over the US and PAL versions, Really Tall would strike back with the first ever US and PAL method. On January 5th, 2017, Tall was able to utilize two glitch mechanics, time stop text storage, and a Yoshi teleport to finally perform TRE on US and PAL, and I'll generalize this method as the Yoshi teleport method. Let's first discuss text storage. This method of text storage is done by using the Ultra Boots and activating Goombella right before spring jumping. In this current state, everything in the room is frozen, such as NPCs and the elevator. We need to get out of this time stop state by activating Goombella while simultaneously closing out of the first text box that we made. Then we need to switch to mouse. Mouse is going to be highly important in being able to move horizontally when Yoshi teleporting in order to land inside the room. With mouse, we press X to open one of her text boxes alongside Goombella's. Right after opening Mouse's text box, we close out of one of Goombella's previous text boxes, then press Z to avoid scrolling past the end of Goombella's text box. This will cause Mouse to produce an additional text box, and we need to close Mouse's first text box while this new text box is still appearing. After all of that crazy setup, we now have both a Goombella and a Mouse text box on screen. Swap to Yoshi along the right side of the teleporter room, hug the perimeter, and walk to the left side and get Yoshi stuck. Eventually, Yoshi will actually respawn inside the teleporter room since the game restricts how far away partners can be from Mario. Finally, we make sure the Goombella text box isn't about to close by pressing Z, pause, press A, and unpause. Upon Mouse's text box closing, we can press X to teleport to Yoshi's position inside the teleporter room. After doing so, we're actually stuck and unable to move around. We finally end with closing out of Goombella's text box to regain control inside the teleporter room. This method may seem complicated with all the text box management required, but RTA runners picked up on it pretty quickly, and it was first used in a world record run 2 days after its discovery by Yoshizilla. This method ultimately saves about 10 minutes in the US and PAL routes, given that TRE wasn't previously possible on these versions of the game. It would have saved more time had this method not required mouths, as runners don't normally obtain her in the route. The first variation of this method was found one day later on January 6, 2017 by Really Tall again, and it negates the need for mouths. First, we need to get time-stop text storage 4 times such that all the text boxes are on different parts of the messages such that we can close one text box at a time. Then we go into paper mode and walk through the loading zone to fall out of bounds, which is possible thanks to time stop. Once we respawn, we'll have something called hitbox glitch, where Mario continues to maintain a smaller hitbox size almost as if he was still in paper mode. This will allow us to stand much further inside the wall of the teleporter room. Next, we trap Yoshi behind this wall below. Most importantly, the floor that Yoshi is standing on is lower than the floor that the teleporter room is on. We close the first text box to begin a Yoshi teleport. Since Yoshi was standing on a floor lower than our current floor, we can teleport below. Thanks to hitbox glitch, we can actually get close enough to the wall to make it underneath the seam of the teleporter room on the first teleport. From here, we can close out the remaining text boxes, which will cause Yoshi's hover animation to reset, allowing him to periodically gain enough height to allow Mario to land on the seam. Landing after performing these Yoshi teleports results in a soft lock, kinda, where Mario is basically dragging his butt along the ground. To get out of this state, we can cause Mario to go into a falling animation by moving up towards the bottles and falling to the left. For some reason, this gets Mario out of the butt drag state and allows him to move around normally to enter the teleporter. Due to the difficulty of managing 4 text boxes, moving Mario precisely onto the seam, and timing the Yoshi hovers, this trick is not RTA viable, but it did prove the point that there would be more methods to be discovered. Several months later, an additional variation of the Yoshi teleport method was found by Sork, which negates the need for mouths in RTA. We start by spring jumping on top of the item shop. From there, we get double text storage with Goombella and the Ultra Boots just like before. Then, along the left side of the roof, we perform a Yoshi teleport to get inside the left railing. We can then go into paper mode and fall down below, while remaining inside the wall. This will cause Yoshi to remain on the roof for a later teleport. After falling down, we navigate to the front of the item shop. At this point, Yoshi's still on top of the roof, so we can perform another Yoshi teleport to rise up to the front-facing edge of the roof. From here, we can spring jump and land on a very tall invisible wall. And this wall is what will allow us to start making our way left towards the teleporter room. Then, we again obtain double text storage. After swapping to Yoshi, we can hover to the left, close one text box to restart the hover timer, close the second to again restart the timer, and hover all the way on top of the teleporter room. Now, to actually get inside the room, we just need to perform one more Yoshi teleport. This method saves around 6 minutes or so from skipping mouths. Presumably due to its long and involved setup and the relative inactivity of US and PAL compared to Japanese, this was never used in any US or PAL world records. Over half a year later, the next unique method of TRE was found, this time with tube mode instead of the Ultra Boots. Because Palaskip had been found, this new method of TRE meant we could skip most of Chapter 4 and completely skip Chapter 6. The first world record to use this method by Sork improved the world record by 19 minutes using this method, followed by a new world record a few hours later by Evan44, which further improved Sork's time by 16 minutes. Tube mode in Evan's world record resulted in an overall time save of around 35 minutes over the world record that didn't use this tube mode method, but the trick overall saves about an hour. To perform this trick, we first go into paper mode and begin to rotate the analog stick to go into tube mode. Right before we actually enter tube mode, we unspin. Since we almost rolled all the way into tube mode, next time we hold a specific direction while holding R, we'll instantly transform into paper mode. From there, we jump towards the door, point the analog stick in a certain direction that continues from the analog stick rotation that we used when starting to spin into tube mode earlier. On the frame that we land, we have to hold R, A, B, and the start button to go into tube mode, open the door, exit out of tube mode, and pause to buffer the tube mode exit action. This will result in us entering the building while in tube mode. Then we have to exit from the pause menu within a pretty wide time window, Doing so will allow us to unspin from tube mode while entering the building. If we don't unspin, we'll end up entering the building normally, when what we really want is to be redirected downwards into the teleporter room. This buffered unspin allows us to be redirected in the direction of the teleporter room, allowing us to fall into the teleporter room and reach the fortress. Note that this trick is US and PAL specific because the paper mode mechanics are different, resulting in you being unable to immediately spin into tube mode upon landing from a jump. Additionally, the angle Mario moves at when unspinning from tube mode when entering the door would be different on the Japanese version. Thus, we cannot perform this method on the Japanese version, though it wouldn't have even saved any time over the flurry superslide method since we don't go to chapter 4 in the Japanese route. Let's fast forward 3 months and the 4th TRE method was discovered. After discovering super jumps, a method by which you can gain infinite height, Solidified Gaming was able to apply this trick to perform teleporter room early, leading to a much simpler version of TRE compared to the earlier tube mode method. First, we need to obtain jump storage. We can obtain this state on a different file and then die and load a file in the East Sewers. We can obtain jump storage by activating Coops right when we start the cutscene at Flurry's house. This sets a certain jump initialization flag such that the flag is not reset on the next jump. The failure of this flag resetting results in the ability to gain infinite height under certain circumstances. Since we're loading a save from East Sewers, it's important that we either have Bobbery or Tube mode in order to be able to bypass the fallen pillar here. If we stand to the left side of the teleporter room, we can go into paper mode up against the wall, move left, and quickly turn around, and then pause and jump on the same frame. Normally, if you jump on completely flat ground with jump storage, your jump will immediately get cancelled, thus ending your jump storage state. However, the turnaround animation of paper mode allows us to buffer a jump in the pause menu. This actually prevents our jump from immediately being cancelled. After rising for a tiny bit, we can unpause and have Mario fall into the teleporter room. Normally, rising straight up in the air wouldn't allow us to get inside a building next to us. The left wall of the teleporter room is actually slightly slanted to the left, such that we can actually pass through the wall as we rise upwards. When we unpause, this allows us to get pushed inside the building to access the teleporter. Soric managed to set a new world record by 14 minutes using this method just a day after its discovery. For the aforementioned method, we still needed Bobbery or Tube mode in order to blow up or roll under the pillar on the right side of the room. The question was, if we were to skip Bobbery and Tube mode, how could we still get jump storage and perform a super jump into the teleporter room? Ultimately, if we were to get jump storage and load a file in the West Sewers, there's seemingly no way to get up to the loading zone without jumping. However, about 4 months after the original super jump method was discovered, Really Tall found a way to make it to the loading zone from the West Sewers without getting rid of jump storage. First, we need to obtain jump storage and load a file in this West room. Second, we need to get text storage, and we can do that using the original method for text storage, in which we perform a delayed Goombella buffer. We start by setting Goombella to the left of this wall. From here, we can hug the perimeter and walk up the right side. Because Goombella is sufficiently far away enough, activating her right before grabbing the star piece will cause her to activate 1 frame later than normal, which gives us just enough time to grab both the star piece and activate her text box. Because we're currently stuck in place, we can enter a battle with the enemy here and run in order to regain control with text storage. Then, we similarly place Yoshi to the left of the wall and hug the right wall and start walking to the right. As mentioned for a previous TRE method, the game restricts how far away partners can be. Thus, when we start moving to the right, Yoshi will respawn higher up on the mid-air platforms. From here, we can close the text box and activate Yoshi to perform a Yoshi teleport upwards. Then, we can just walk to the right into the loading zone and perform teleporter room early with a super jump. Interestingly, this method is only available on the PAL version of the game. In the US and Japanese versions of the game, Goombella only has 1 text box in the West Sewers room, meaning that you can't keep this text box up after the battle. Only Italian and French offer 2 text boxes in this room, so for a little while it was theorized that PAL would be faster, though no world record runs were made with this method. Before we go on to the next method, it's important to touch on an important discovery that makes the next method possible. Solidified Gaming found that if you have a star piece or item bouncing towards you, activating Yoshi at the same time as grabbing the item results in jump storage. Mario's jump to hop on Yoshi is correctly initialized, but fails to reset the flag responsible for jump storage. About a month after this new discovery, on April 8th, Solidified Gaming discovered that you could move an item drop from the Spania and have it land near the loading zone above. Because Solidified Gaming previously discovered that you can get jump storage off of moving items and star pieces, we can simply toss the item, use Yoshi right before it lands on us, bring jump storage into the next room, and perform a super jump. Because this no longer required text storage with Goombella, we didn't have to worry about language constraints, meaning this was now possible on all versions of the game. This version was then improved by utilizing either the star piece inside the bar or the one to the left of the teleporter room behind a pillar. For simplicity, I'll just show the one inside the bar. We can use Yoshi as soon as the star piece lands on us to get jump storage. From there, we can simply use the previously mentioned super jump strategy to land inside the room. Even with all of these improvements over time, the Japanese exclusive teleporter room early method still meant that the Japanese game had a few minute lead over US and PAL due to an alternative benefit that the Japanese version of TRE offers. For Chapter 3, we can skip the normally intended side quests where Mario has to run around to various parts of the Glitz Pit. We can skip the side quests by entering Glitzville in a post-Chapter 3 state. Because we would normally be arriving in Glitzville in a Chapter 3 state after obtaining the blimp ticket normally, we need to visit an alternative chapter in order to skip the side quests. For the Japanese speedrun, we can just perform TRE, complete Chapter 7, and then visit Glitzville since we'll be in a Chapter 7 state. But for the US and PAL run, we need Yoshi from Chapter 3 before we can do teleporter room early. Thus, for US and PAL, you have to use the next best option, Chapter 6. This takes a bit more time than the Japanese route, so this still means that Japanese was faster overall. As an additional side note, Blimp Ticket Skip was discovered on April 30th, 2019, and it meant that we could get Yoshi without having to complete Chapter 2. Thus, the new route would require that we go to Poshley Heights and finish the end of Chapter 6, in order to be able to start setting up Blimp Ticket Skip. But in order to access Poshley Heights, we need the Chapter 2 Super Boots to open the blue warp pipe. For US and PAL, this meant completing all of the Great Tree in order to reach the Super Boots as intended. But for the Japanese speedrun, we could use the Japanese exclusive TRE method to advance to a Chapter 7 state, and then go back to grab the Super Boots without having to deal with all the cutscenes that normally occur in the Great Tree. Thus, the Japanese speedrun began to break ahead from the US and PAL speedrun again. I'd like to remind you all that every method I've mentioned, except for the first method, only benefited the US and PAL speedrun, as the Japanese-only version was objectively the fastest out of all the other methods. So the question is, would the US and PAL versions ever come back to reign as the fastest versions of the game again? Thanks to Really Tall, the answer is yes. On October 17th, 2019, Really Tall found a new method, and it was unlike anything we had dealt with prior. Over time, we saw the US and PAL teleporter room early versions become more and more simple over time, and perhaps this method is the perfect end for that trend. This is the unspin clip method. By viewing room collision in a 3D modeling viewer program like Blender, it was discovered that there's actually a small gap between the doorway and the front wall of the teleporter room. The initial theory was to use paper mode as the hitbox size is smaller, which may possibly allow Mario to squeeze inside the gap. The only problem with this gap is that the collision is able to successfully push us away when we're walking around slowly in paper mode. If we had more speed, then we could probably make it through. Really Tall recalled that we knew about unspin jumps, wherein you jump the frame after leaving paper mode. This immediately returns you to full speed, without instantly resetting your hitbox size. By jumping at a precise up-left angle right in front of this gap, you are able to successfully clip through. And the best part? This works on all regions. We were dumbfounded because after all the iterations of TRE methods involving text storage and Yoshi teleports and super jumps, this came out to be the best solution. Since this method only requires paper mode, we no longer need to grab Flurry. Additionally, it meant that US and PAL speedruns could now grab the Super Boots in Chapter 2 without completing the Great Tree normally. Because of this new teleporter room early method, as well as some US and PAL exclusive differences such as a better way to set up Blimp Ticket Skip, and a skip for the Goomba fight in the prologue, US and PAL are now the fastest regions for the any % speedrun. Ever since Ultra Hammer Early's discovery in September 2014, Japanese has been the definitive fastest region for the game's speedrun. And yet, just over 5 years later, it's come full circle and US and PAL have pulled ahead. And this is the satisfying end to our story. The amazing effort of TWill14, Solidified Gaming, Really Tall, and Soric is the sole reason why all of this progression has been possible over the past couple years. It's thanks to them that the any % speedrun is that much faster. I hope you all now can appreciate the history behind one of the game's most elusive glitches and its progression over time. And with that, thanks for watching.